Welcome Robert McGowan, Regional Sales Vice President.
I vividly remember watching a young man die on the basketball court. Amazingly, this occurred just seconds after he'd thrown down a ferocious slam dunk. After that, he backpedaled to midcourt and collapsed onto the floor. I remember his body convulsing as his teammates, coaches, and medical personnel rushed to his side. That player was collegiate All-American Hank Gathers. Some of you may also recall that tragedy. It was a moment that terrified me, not only because of what I feared Hank's outcome might be, but because at that moment, I felt like I was seeing my future. It's still a painful memory, but it's also a day that saved my life. When I was in high school, I was obsessed with being viewed as an athlete. Sports weren't everything. To me, they were the only thing. I played football, basketball, and golf in high school, and when people referred to me as a good athlete, I was most proud. At that time in my life, the label athlete defined me. Early in my sophomore year, I began noticing issues with my heart. It would race at alarming speeds when I exerted myself. This would happen quite often, and the episodes could last for as little as 1 minute and as many as 20. There were times during football and basketball practice that I would nearly black out as I continued pushing myself and my heart pounded away in my chest. I felt like sometimes it was going to explode. Well, when I learned of Hank Gather's death, I came to my parents in tears and told them that I needed to see a doctor. That decision saved my life. On April 11th, 1990, I was diagnosed with atrial tachycardia, which is a defect in the heart that can cause it to race up to 200 beats per minute. Sadly, I'd known about this issue for nearly a year before I mentioned it to anyone. And I'd like to tell you that I didn't mention it because I didn't foresee the seriousness of the issue or the fact that it could kill me. No, my number one fear was that I would no longer be able to be an athlete. What would that mean to me? Who am I if I'm not an athlete? What would people call me now? Handicapped? Sick? Weak? Those fears were realized for a time as doctors tried to figure out what medications and in what doses would be needed to regulate my heart rhythm. My junior season in basketball, I was allowed to practice with the team, but I couldn't play in games. Doctors feared that if I had an episode during a game, that I would continue playing through it and that I would die. In practice, if I had my heart racing, then I would have to take myself out of any drills or scrimmages, lie down, and rest until my heart rate came back down to a normal pace. That season was challenging, and I never felt like I was part of that team. I felt weak. I felt different. And I felt excluded. Luckily, doctors found medications in high school that allowed me to play my entire senior year in the sports I loved. I excelled. And more importantly to me, I was an athlete again. Why was the need for me to be labeled as an athlete so important? If you think about it, labels are essentially forms of identification. They're the names you mentally call yourself in your head. They're the tags you believe describe who you are. They can be positive or negative. And it's human nature to use them. And while there's nothing wrong using certain words to describe ourselves, we have to be careful that we're not solely defined or limited by these labels. Labels can wield a great deal of power and influence on a person's life and how they experience things around them. As time went on, my heart condition worsened. I could no longer manage it with medication. I would need a surgery that would eliminate the tachycardia, but it would also mean that I would need a pacemaker to stay alive. I found out this awesome information on my 21st birthday. Instead of celebrating the next phase of my life, I felt like my life was ending. Again, the fears of not being an athlete surfaced. However, this time, I was afraid of losing much more. I would be dependent on a machine just to keep me alive. I felt helpless. In getting the pacemaker implanted, I felt violated. I remember how worried my friends and family were about me, and I truly appreciated their concern, but I also resented it. You see, they no longer saw an athletic young man. They saw someone who had become fragile and weak. I was far from the confident athlete. I was emaciated. I was frightened about my future, and I felt alone. Now, this story does have a happy ending. Since that first pacemaker was implanted nearly 22 years ago, I've had several new pacemakers. Each one is more advanced and gives me more freedom to live my life to the fullest. The physical limitations that I was sure would accompany the pacemaker were never realized. Physical challenges, no matter how significant, pale in comparison to the limitations we create in our own minds. With my pacemaker, I participated in bicycle rides up to 50 miles. I love tearing up the trails and pushing the envelope on my mountain bike. And through my love of bikes, I found triathlons, and we'll be competing in one this June. I'm an athlete again, and I love that fact. But it's important to note that this label no longer defines me. It's just part of the multidimensional person that I am today. So I spoke earlier about some of the reasons we use labels and the influence they can have on a person's life. Labels used in negative self-talk can be the most harmful. They can restrict you from your fullest potential, and they do not honor the person you can be. I used to believe that I was not creative, and I'm not sure where that label came from, but I believed it for so long that it had become ingrained. And as I began my 4th year in the district manager role with this company, I was uncertain if limitations like this would prevent me from advancing in my career. However, 5 years ago, I experienced a day that changed my life and opened doors for me that I did not believe were possible. It gave me the framework for this bed talk, and it carries deep meaning to me on a very personal level. In January 2011, my fellow district manager, Dustin Kinney, and I were tasked with creating a leadership meeting. This meeting would be conducted throughout the company, and it carried with it significant expectations. You see, we were struggling at that time, and we needed a boost, not only in sales, but also in morale. Dustin and I were excited to work on this project together. We'd become close friends, and we're very complimentary to one another. Dustin was incredibly creative and had this boundless energy that was infectious. I was great at taking other people's ideas, refining them, and making them look good for a presentation. I was more reserved and laid back, and I helped harness the enthusiasm that sometimes got Dustin a bit sidetracked. As we begin the process of building the content for this meeting, I took my normal spot behind my laptop so I could capture Dustin's outstanding and sometimes outlandish ideas. Dustin's first idea, however, was to change the way we built the meeting. He asked me to write down our ideas on the large whiteboard we had at the training center. I told him that I'd rather capture the ideas on my laptop and put them into a deck. Dustin was a closer, though, and he knew what he was doing. He convinced me this idea would work best. So I went along with it, and before you knew it, Dustin's plan was taking shape. For the next 2 hours, ideas were flying, and I captured as many as I could on the whiteboard. That's the original whiteboard, by the way, which is pretty cool. It was a big moment for us. As we came towards the end of this, I noticed Dustin was on his laptop. And I asked him what he was doing. He said he was capturing the ideas to put them into a deck. And I said, that's what I normally do. Dustin reminded me, however, that we had changed things up this time around. Okay? Admittedly, I felt my need to handle quality control for the content causing me some anxiety. Dustin, however, redirected my attention to the whiteboard. Look at that thing, Rob. I took a look at the board and laughed. Yeah, can you actually read that thing, dude? Of course I can, he said. But take a look at the ideas. So I looked again. Yeah, buddy, there's some good stuff on there. Hopefully we can build it into our meeting. Yeah, I already did most of that, Dustin told me. But take a good look at the ideas. At this point, I felt like I was missing something. Yeah, there's a lot of incredible ideas. Some of them are written sideways. Man, my handwriting sucks. Look at the ideas, Rob. Look at them. At this point, it hit me. Most of those ideas are mine. I had come up with those ideas. After years and years of telling myself I wasn't creative, Dustin had blown this long-standing belief out of the water in just 2 short hours. This seemingly simple moment shook me to my core. I was creative. Telling myself I wasn't creative was not only limiting, I realize now I'd use it as a crutch. If I told people I wasn't creative, then they wouldn't expect that of me. I could just stay in my comfort zone and fall back on the excuse that the creative label just doesn't fit me. As I thought about it, I wondered, what other labels had I used to define myself that were actually false? Think of the limits I'd placed on myself over the years because of this approach. For the first time, I felt like my potential was boundless. If I stopped believing in labels, especially those that would inherently just hold me back in life. Think about some of the labels you use. Do they limit you unnecessarily? Do you use them as a crutch? I challenge all of you to think about that when you leave here. Identify at least one of these labels and question its validity. If you stop believing that these limits existed, what would be possible for you in your career? And more importantly, in your life? Now, as I relay that story, some of you may have noticed that I spoke of Dustin in the past tense. And I wish that was because this event occurred back in 2011. However, I lost my close friend just a few short years ago to suicide. I was aware of some of Dustin's negative self-labeling, and I know he had his struggles over the years. I also know that people will label his life and his death in their own ways. I cannot explain nor fully comprehend this tragedy, and it's way too complicated to even attempt here. What I do know is the most important label I use for him is friend. One of the ways I honor his life and our friendship is by staying true to this approach. Labels do not have to create limits. Let's take a look at some of the common labels people might use to describe themselves. Now, some of these might be positive, negative, maybe just limiting. Funny, organized, controlling, sensitive, stupid, strong, beautiful, bald. Wait, hold on a second. Those last two seem to remind me of somebody I might know, right? What's that? Matt Forbes? No, not Matt. Okay, this could get awkward. Let's get back to the list here. Emotional, charismatic, MFI, STI. Hold on a second. Are those last two actually labels? Has anyone here used those as labels over the past year or so? Anyone? Bueller. Bueller. Well, it's okay to admit it, and I'll gladly throw myself under the bus and say that I certainly did. But as I took my current role as RVP of the Great Plains, I recognized that these labels could add value for identification purposes. But unfortunately, they did more than that. They created separation at times. They slowed our integration and our plans for a truly great transformation. Most of the time, they were just unnecessary. We had two great companies with amazing people come together, and we're now one. You're not STI, and I'm not MFI. Those aren't labels, folks. Those are proud brands with storied histories. Now we welcome Sleepy's. And as we do, let's learn from this past year. These are our new teammates. They're part of the MFRM family. That's all of us. And that's really all we need to know, right? So far, I've talked about a day that saved my life and a day that changed my life. This next story is about the day that made my life. This is a young boy's story. In 2007, due to circumstances he couldn't control, this little boy, this 3-year-old, found himself in foster care, like so many other young kids do across the U.S. every single day. Only 3 years old, and already his future was becoming very uncertain. Fortunately for this little guy, he was placed in a great home with very caring and responsible foster parents. After 1 year with these foster parents, this little boy found a permanent home. This little boy is my son, Andres. He joined our family on November 16, 2008, and has brightened our days ever since. Andres was one of the fortunate foster children. Many of these kids will live their entire lives in foster care. They will bounce from home to home, and because of the uncertainty in their lives and circumstances, they will develop their own labels. Think of how frightened and vulnerable these kids must feel. What labels will they use to describe themselves? Unimportant? Unwanted? Unloved? Those are powerful. And no one should feel that way about themselves. But for many of these kids, it's all they know. That's why I'm so passionate about our foster kids charity. The fact that this is now our national charity gives me great hope. These kids can be part of our family. How awesome is that? It truly gives me goosebumps just thinking about the difference we can make in so many of their lives. And we could do that today. As I conclude, I ask you just give me a few more seconds of your time. You see, my son's here today. And I would like to say something to him. Hey, Andres, I wanted you to know how very special you are to me. You brighten every day with your amazing smile and your positive energy. I'm so lucky to have you in my life. I love you so much, buddy. Just a couple more things for him. I love you so much. I wanted everyone here to know it. You make our family complete. You're the best son a father could ever hope to have, and your future is truly boundless. There is a label that's infinite, it's ever evolving, and it has no limits. It's the one I'm most proud of. Dad.